All right, let's go. Who has a question? Nobody. Okay, see you next year. All right.
It's to Cheryl and to anybody else that wants to weigh in, but as far as data and abductions, sightings, groupings, like clusters, or even shapes and abductions, is there any sort of data that you've correlated that have to do with the abduction phenomenon?
Okay. One, getting abduction and experiencer information is next to impossible. Most of the people in the database did not indicate it. Every now and then there was an indication. Some of it that was investigated, like with the MUFON investigators, it's buried down in the non-public part, so I couldn't get that information. Okay, they were very kind to me, but they didn't want me to out anybody. Also, I was a press person, and they were touchy about that. Okay, now anybody who's seen a UFO, I consider an experiencer. So at least we have 167,632 times that by 258. Okay, that's the best number I can give you.
Question for Ray. You've mentioned that you had several thousand respondents in your survey of
4,350.
Okay. How and where did you get the names?
Okay. We advertised our surveys over a 3.5-year period. We advertised them on over 200 Facebook sites on a weekly basis, sites that dealt with the paranormal and ufology. We also had very big names in ufology in our organization. 2 of them had a weekly radio show. So for 3.5 years, they advertised our surveys in a radio show. Kathleen Martin, Rosemary Guiley, Barbara Lamb, Leo Sprinkle. We also had a mailing list of over 8,000 emails. So they were sent out via emails. Everyone gave us their mailing list. And so these people got monthly mailings about our website. So it was widely distributed. And many of the people that are here, they said, I took your survey, 8 years ago when you first did that. So I hope I answered your question.
I think this is for Ray Hernandez on contact modalities. I'd like to hear you talk about Stephen Greer and CE5 briefly. Just what's your opinion?
I have zero connection with Stephen Greer, and I don't want to have any connections with Stephen Greer. I am in connection with the people that actually started the phenomenon with Grupo Rama in Peru in 1974. I'm very good friends with Dr. Joseph Burks. He wrote Chapter 6 on medical healings. He started with Stephen Greer. He was the Los Angeles representative from 1992 to 1998. And so he's told me tons of stories, and also of other people who know of Dr. Greer. I also know about that little skeleton, and that was all, I know what's behind that little skeleton. And we'll leave it at that.
Hi, my question is to the entire panel. Mainly, I can't remember that gentleman's name. Have any of y'all got to delve into all of the disclosures that President Trump made possible for everybody? I mean, all the documents, the folders and the files, the pictures that have been released thus far since he made that possible?
Well, I think it's an ongoing situation. Certainly, I know that when he was president, Donald Trump gave a couple of interviews where he dropped some heavy hints. He certainly commented on the US Navy videos, and he said something like, our very fine pilots see these things, and we're still looking into it. He also, in another interview, said, yeah, a lot of people ask me about, I think I wasn't quite clear whether he was talking about Roswell or Area 51, but he said, yeah, a lot of people ask about it, and I know a lot of things about it, and I can't necessarily say. So he dropped some teasing hints, but I mean, until the presidential library is produced, I don't know what, by way of private papers, are going to be declassified. Of course, all the other things that he was talking about, that story continues to unfold, and obviously the documents went up on the Defense Intelligence Agency website last week. They should be back up again next week under a different title, and more Freedom of Information Act requests are in the pipeline, so there should be more to come.
I'd like to ask our keynote speaker from last night, what do you feel is the connection between reincarnation and UFOs?
Yeah, that's a pretty broad question, and I hate to get into personal belief systems and religion. My personal, in studying NDEs, and I think most of the researchers suggested reincarnation is the most likely probability, but very few will go on record and say this is absolutely true. Between that and UFOs, I don't know, that would be a leap. I do mention, though, that the interactions, I said yesterday, between humans and sentient non-humans have been going on for the entirety of human history in all cultures. That they happen to fly in little tin cans is a fairly new wrinkle, compared to the millennia of reports. So I'm not sure how to make a direct connection. I'm sorry if that doesn't address it, but yeah, Raymond.
Let me address that in two different ways. One is that we asked that question in our surveys of the experiencers, and approximately 25% of the experiencers were told by non-human intelligence about reincarnation. Secondly, as John alluded to before, I know, and he knows, most of the major NDE researchers, from Kenneth Ring, Raymond Moody, Dr. Jeffrey Long, Dr. Ibn Alexander, and Dr. Bruce Grayson, etc. The institute where Dr. Bruce Grayson works at, the person that hired him, Ian Stevenson, that was what he specialized for a 30-year period on reincarnation. And many of them won't publicly tell you, as John has stated them, but I know a lot of these people personally. They've told me that that is part of the cycle. When we die, we go up there, and reincarnation is the next likely phenomenon.
May I say that I was born 3 days after Einstein died. Now, traditionally, it takes 3 days to be reincarnated, right now. My family will tell you that I'm not a numbers guy, so it's unlikely that...
Okay, in regards to reincarnation, I always held an understanding of it and a belief in it, but I never had it handed to me in a technical sense until a Buddhist Lama walked up to me in a receiving line and said, "I know you." And then after we had a private meeting, it basically was, like a new chicken suit, huh? Okay.
Let me add a little shameless commercial here for our promoters. If you're interested in more data on this topic, specifically related to UFOs, buy Dolores' book, The 3 Waves of Volunteers. Okay. So
I would, in direct answer, as I mentioned, I was the president of IONS, and I know all of the researchers, and nobody will go on the record. But the conversation at these conferences, after, privately, is, pretty, I would say that IONS will be having their conference in Salt Lake City Labor Day weekend. I recommend there's a really good lineup of speakers that's up there.
First of all, I want to say what a great panel we have up here from historians, scientists, Bigfoot. I mean, everything's represented here, so this is a unique panel. And coming at it from a high strangeness person who had experiences on a ranch similar to Skinwalker Ranch, this question's kind of for the whole panel. What do you think of portals and interdimensional UFOs, beings, cryptids, and all that, and Bigfoot and UFOs connection? Thank you.
Yeah, I would mention, I guess this is a follow-up, there is a private network called Survival Net, which you can't get into. It's by invitation only of people who are looking at the survival of consciousness. And this is a perennial question that is being constantly discussed about, the continuation of consciousness beyond bodily death is taken as an absolute, but what does that mean? And the nuances and things, areas like reincarnation, there's lots of debate among the experts on that.
To answer or go to your question, we did a show on Discovery Plus called Alien Invasion Hudson Valley, and as a science guy, I was brought on to kind of take care of the scientific data collection and make sure that this wasn't too far over the edge into the, well, maybe this is happening, we want to prove something is happening. Well, we had things happen, things I can't explain. And, and I created a talk specifically called Where Does Science Go in the Face of the Unexplained? And I wrote articles about that because that's what was happening. So the goal of the show was to actually create portals or to investigate where they were. And I had things happen that to me before the show that indicated that this stuff was real. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but one of them landed me in the hospital. I actually saw a semi-transparent animal walk into my visual effects shop, and I didn't know what it was, and I stepped on it, and it yanked my leg out from under me, and I saw both my feet in the air for a brief second, and then I slammed down onto the concrete, and that took me to the hospital with 6 months of recovery on a shoulder that was really wrenched out of the socket. So how do I explain that, right? I mean, was that a multiverse situation? That's kind of where I lean as an astronomer. I lean toward, well, maybe this was a complete interaction, rudimentary communication with something, and it didn't like me, right? I mean, possible. So was that a portal? Was that rudimentary communication? Because I had been seeing other things leading up to that for 2 years before that. I had a net put on my head by a neurologist with a cable. I looked like a Borg. And they were doing tests, and I would hit a button every time I saw something. And they had all these fancy explanations for what they thought it was, but they had no idea, and they said so. So from a physical world point of view, no one knew what it was. So I have an open mind, as you probably guessed. And so when I saw what was happening during that production, which at first I thought, this is going to be a production. They're going to say what they have to say to make it exciting. But we didn't have to, because exciting stuff happened. And I couldn't believe it, So, of course, that's the phrase I kept saying, I can't believe this, I can't believe that, right? But you have to believe it, right? So I know that something exists, and maybe they're portals, maybe they're parallel universe intersections, which is a term I coined, PUI, parallel universe intersect. And in the world of astronomy, we know there's possibly other universes out there. So that said, that's my experience with that. So I hope that's helpful.
I think that with the UFO phenomenon, we try to find one singular answer. And I think we may not be dealing with a phenomenon singular, but a phenomena, a multitude of different things originating from different places. Are they from outer space? Possibly. Are they from another time? Possibly. The multidimensional aspect, the interdimensional aspect, I think explains a lot of high strangeness that we see in these cases, where the witness has an altered perception of time and space. I think that lends to this interdimensional concept. What's interesting, though, is when you look back, as a historian on the panel here, you look back at writings of early UFO researchers in the late 50s into like the late 60s, they would often postulate, could we be dealing with not the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but the interdimensional hypothesis? And they were raked across the coals by mainstream scientists of the time, saying this is just another example of the folly that these UFO researchers engage in. They watch Star Trek and then they think it's real. Well, now, as you know, turn on the Science Channel any night and you see leading astrophysicists talking about multiverses. This has now become mainstream. I like to think that science is trying to catch up with the UFO phenomenon rather than the other way around. And so I think the multidimensional, the interdimensional hypothesis is one of the leading hypotheses. And I get tired of the skeptics that continually lodge arguments against the existence of UFOs using skepticism as it applies to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Well, the nearest star is so many light years away, and the energy requirements would be so excessive, and yada, yada, yada. You've heard it a million times. If we're dealing with the interdimensional origin of these things, all of those explanations, or so-called explanations for the phenomenon, are moot, pure and simple.
Let me just say that my lecture on Friday was just about what he just said. We have an organization, and Dr. Alexander is part of it, the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, and John knows all these people, you know, by first name. These are all top of the line scientists, physicists, neuroscientists, et cetera, people with PhDs in religion and philosophy, et cetera. And I would say the vast majority of them believe in the hypothesis, as I said before, that consciousness is primary and that these are interdimensional experiences. And so my first two books that were coming out in June 1st is going to be over 1,600 pages discussing just that. So if people want to get free copies of 8 chapters from my second book, which is discussing what I just said, what he just said, send me an email to info@agreaterreality.com, info@agreaterreality.com, and I'll send you those 8 chapters so you can begin to understand what these scientists are talking about.
Very quickly, there have been so many events of high strangeness that have occurred to us over the years up on the Sierra Camp that Ron has come to the conclusion that there is some kind of a vortex up there. That's his word, vortex. As well as Dave Paulides and Joe Hauser, and Dave Paulides eventually actually moved up to Joe Hauser's ranch up in Montana. They call it the Montana vortex. So whether you call it a portal or whatever else, that's beyond my domain, of course. But Ron has come to the conclusion, because Sasquatches seem to appear and disappear in an instant. So interdimensionality would be a perfect explanation for that. So we have to embrace that concept.
If you were a student in one of my remote viewing classes, and the target was an alien base on the backside of the moon, when you got done with the remote viewing thing, most of the people put their pens down and they say, boy, those people didn't like us being there. Okay, and they're aware of you. That exercise of your consciousness being projected there, shift, not out-of-body experience, but shifted to that point of time and place, you were an interdimensional traveler.
Hi. First of all, this is my first rodeo, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. So thank you very much. I'll be back. So my question, I guess it could be for the whole panel, but Mr. Marler in particular, is there a need for research assistance, understanding that these are probably unpaid positions, or how can we help compile this data and that you're
Yes.
collecting.
Yes, I said we're a data-rich field, but we are definitely short on labor. So, I've had a lot of local in the Albuquerque area, as well as visiting researchers, actually come down and assist. Katie is here from Colorado, MUFON, and our mutual friend Barry has come down. He actually helped me catalog my library and a small portion. But yes, certainly, I think I speak for all of us that there's certainly a lot of work to be done, and we can only do so much. I mean, just to be completely transparent. And so yes, certainly, if you're interested in the subject and you're willing, everyone, I think, can play a role in this field, whether it's gathering data, sorting data, doing field investigations, the work that Ray and his organization is doing. I think we all need help in some respect. And certainly funding as well. I'd like to dispel the rumor that, people sell UFO books to make money. I don't know about anyone else on the panel, but I'm not filthy rich, so.
Yeah, I mean, that was sort of the point I was trying to make, is that we provided these reference desks of sightings, so that for people, lay scientists, lay investigators such as yourself, you can take your state or your area, and if you want to correlate it with airline patterns or heat on the ground or cloud cover, whatever, that level of research is not something we have the time to do. But if you come up with a question that you want to answer, you could probably do it with the material that we provide you as to where the sightings were and what kind they were.
I want to say thank you all for being a great audience. And my parting thought is I think we're all interconnected in a way that needs greater exploration, and that you're more than you really think you are. Thank you.
I'd like to add a quick comment to what the speakers have been saying. How you can get involved is share your experiences somehow with somebody somewhere. How many times have you talked to people and go, oh yeah, I've seen UFOs. Well, did you ever report them? No. I mean, granted, we have more data and we know what to do with, but we need all the data, right? So if you have experiences, share your data, and then secondly, get involved in whatever if you want to, and if you have the time, get involved with your local organizations and become an investigator and get out there and talk to people and go see things, okay?
This is for Scott Nelson. I'm glad you mentioned David Paulides because I had a question. You mentioned that when David Paulides was with you at the Sierra camp, that some bad stuff happened. And if you can expand on that, can you tell me where I can find more information? And is in the haunted or the hunted movie?
You're talking about the time me and Ron took Dave Paulides up there. There were some really bad wildfires in California going on that year. We were up there for 10 days. The whole time, we were really breathing in smoke from the rest of California. The sky was brown. But we kept track of the wildfires were far enough away. We weren't worried about actually getting caught in one. Of course, I had my son up there, Stephen, the first kid ever to go up there with me, me and my son, since he was 12. And so, of course, I was worried. I was constantly worried. The other guys didn't seem to worry about it, and Stephen certainly didn't care. He's a young guy. But I was worried, oh, my God, if something was to happen and my son was hurt up here, that would have been the worst thing possible. So we got down off the mountain, and within a day after we got down off the mountain, directly off of this to the west of the Sierra camp, there were 3, quote, lightning strikes that to me were almost strategically placed. It looked like it was targeted. And that this was the explanation that we got from the Forest Service. because what happened was the way the wind was blowing toward the east, like it always does in that area, these 3 lightning strikes that hit down in the valley, down off of the mountain, caused 3 fires that immediately, because of the wind, swept up the mountain and completely consumed the Sierra camp. No one's been up, we have not been up there since then. So we have no idea. All we do know that the trails, the switchback trails all the way up, have just been covered over with fallen trees. And these are big trees. So even to clear the path back up there would be monumental. So that's one of our next goals, is try to get back up there to see what is left. But we do know that, and right away, the fire went away. It swept up the mountain, completely consumed the top of that ridge where our Sierra camp was. And then it went away. So to me, and I think I read more into it than even Dave, but you know, we're all concerned. And talking about it, I get emotional because I feel like if it had happened one day earlier, we would have all been dead, including my son. That was probably the worst thing that happened up there at that time when Dave was with us.
First off, I want to thank all the speakers. They're very educated, and I'm glad you could impart your knowledge. Briefly, the Rendlesham Forest incident was mentioned. There's so many data points and so many eyewitness testimonies. They're very reliable. Any conclusions that people, that you guys are the experts, any conclusions that may be more probable of what it was?
I'm going to tell you my honest answer, having researched and investigated this. I did a cold case review of it when I was at the Ministry of Defense, and then subsequently I teamed up with 2 of the main witnesses, John Burroughs and Jim Peniston. And while John and Jim kind of have their own theories, and Jim inclines towards time travel hypothesis, my honest conclusion is I still don't know. I always try to differentiate between what I know and what I think, and I think there's a lot of things in the mix with Rendlesham, but personally, there's not enough, even now, 40 years on, for me to come to a definitive conclusion.
Well, I've said that I believe is one of the best cases out there. There's about 60-some witnesses that have come forward. It's one of these that over time it gets better. That it was years later, Chuck is a personal friend, of course. He was the deputy base commander at the time. And it wasn't until years later that they actually came up with the radar explanation of, to confirm that things were flying over there. He also talks about, I don't want to tell his story, but it being out in the forest and this thing maneuvering, splitting into 5 pieces. 2 of them come zipping off and put laser beam at his feet. I find these to be personally highly credible witnesses.
Let me add one more point on that. I think one of the interesting aspects of Rendlesham, which is still unfolding, and with apologies, because of HIPAA and the whole concept of medical confidentiality. I can't go into a huge amount of detail on this, but I don't think it's disputed that some of the Rendlesham witnesses have claimed that they have health issues that result from that encounter. And indeed, if you read the declassified UK intelligence assessment Project Condign, you will see a quote in there that says the well-reported Rendlesham incident is a case where it may be that that witnesses were exposed to UAP radiation for longer periods of time than normal. We also know, and I'll have to choose my words carefully here, that some of those Rendlesham witnesses were approached by individuals certainly with strong connections to ORSAP and ATIP, and asked to provide blood samples and DNA samples. And there have been some media stories kind of hinting at that, though it hasn't necessarily made the Rendlesham connection yet. I did advise one of them. I said, look, if you go to any meeting you want, but if they offer you a coffee cup, make sure you take the cup out with you unless you want to consent and give that DNA sample.
Another thing that we learned on this is that everybody thinks it was 2 or 3 incidents that happened at a very short period of time near Christmas. Reality is that went on for much, much longer. And I had talked to witnesses who were assigned there at the base who had access to the base radio. These were like the provost marshal and that, who just kept track of everything that was going on. For months later, these incidents were so common that the, we call distaff, the civilian dependents, were now going out and tracking these things. I actually saw a film taken maybe a month later of some light. Now, the problem was there was no reference to what it was, but strange lights out in the forest. So this continued for much longer than just 2 or 3 simple incidents that have been recorded that, you know, Nick and all those folks have written about.
This is for John Alexander. There was a program on a History Channel that just wrapped up a few weeks ago called the Blind Frog Ranch. Claims to be next to the Sherman Ranch with odd things going on. I'd like your opinion on that show and if it's legit or just not legit.
I first became acquainted with the Blind Frog Ranch when I was up this last summer filming for Skinwalker 3, the 3rd season of it. Have not been out there, so I can't really say what's going on or whether they're just taking advantage of things. But we do know, though, the incidents are not constrained to the geographic locations of the ranch. In other words, you know, where the surveyors have put in, so this is the ranch. Things that happened to the Garcia Ranch, which was just to the east. There were things that happened up on the ridge. Frankly, the Navajo in the area have known about this for more than a century. So it didn't start with the Shermans or as recently, but this is a long time ongoing in an area phenomena. So the ranch, the Blind Frog is what, maybe 15 miles away, kind of to the northeast of the Skinwalker Ranch.
Question for John Alexander. What, in your opinion, is the percentage chance that you think that the government has ever recovered a UFO since World War II? Give me a percentage.
This is one that gets me into trouble. And yeah, first of all, when you get to Roswell, when you look at the case, the data never all fit. And I used to have this with Edgar Mitchell, who was a good friend. It was an area where we said we agree to disagree. My short answer would be no. I don't believe that's to be the case. I do have slides in other briefings that talk about if the I cataloged something like 114 bodies and all of this, and the number of crashes that have taken place. And my comment is, if ET can get across the universe and keeps crashing here, they've got an engineering problem. They don't have simple collision avoidance technology that most of you have in your cars. The contrary, and others who support the theory then say, well, it's intentional that gifts are sort of being left behind. The problem that I have with the material that I know is being researched is the provenance. Now, where did it actually come from and under what circumstances? And that's there have been various materials that have been collected for 2 or 3 decades at least. But the problem has always been, I say, provenance, keeping track of where did it come from, what's the continuity. You could never go to court on it just because of lack of credibility.
Yeah, I have two questions, and they're serious questions, although they may sound funny. Does anybody know or has been told by personal ET contact why they crash if they're so technically advanced? And the second question is, has anybody been told by an ET how many years, and I know time is relative, but how far into the future are they beyond us? Is it 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years? I've never heard that mentioned in Ancient Aliens or in places like this.
I'll tackle that. I've sat on a lot of science boards. I was with an Army Science Board and others looking, projecting straight world stuff into the future, where technologies will go. And categorically, but we've been wrong most of the time when you try to project. And I'm talking, today's technology, where does it take you? What are the things that will emerge? So that finding out, accurately, let alone extrapolating into wild and wonderful things like, is it 1,000,000 years in advance? And if you look at most of our scientific advances that say what's happened within the last century, for instance, a century ago, you wouldn't even have predicted these things. They're beyond that. And you might have said, well, if that's true, it's 1,000 years in advance. So one of the things I can tell you, if any of you know Stephen Schwartz, who had Mobius Group doing remote viewing, and one of his projects in the 1970s and 80s was looking at 2050. In other words, what is emerging at 2050? What he will tell you is that all of the things, the major things that were predicted, have already come to pass. He's now doing a study on 2060, and so the problem really is getting ahead of it, because the things that remote viewers are seeing in these temporal shifts, the biggie, of course, is, yes, the United States still exists, but in a very different form than it is now. Basically, what you have are regional entities as opposed to a strong national central government. And I would look forward to, he's doing the analysis on the data now. It'll probably take a couple of years to put that all together. But predicting the future is really, really tough.
One of the things that I wanted to mention was specifically the question of how far into the future are they. I've actually done some analysis, and based on our current levels of actual hard science, we already see on a distant horizon that we can go to the nearest stars very fast. And that time frame might be 2 weeks to get to Alpha Centauri. That's using, say, an Alcubierre drive. I've talked about that here. It's the warp drive that classically known as a warp drive. I mean, that's the simplest way it's explained. So that's coming, but that's not even fast enough. We have to do something else if we're going to travel truly interstellar. And that means we have to continue to look at a theory known as string theory. I won't go into string theory. Don't worry, you're not going to fall asleep. Okay? But string theory does relate ways to us in which we can move out of our dimensional space, move into an auxiliary dimensional space. Actually, it's called the bulk, like bulk produce. That's the actual name. You can look it up. And from there, everything is connected. So we could actually reemerge at Alpha Centauri. And there's a physicist I talked to just before I came here about this very problem. And she said, well, if we can get our ship into the bulk just a little bit, then we could actually reduce the distance from here to Alpha Centauri to an equivalent of like a 25-mile drive. Now, consider that it would take us right now, with our current technology, well over 10,000 years to get to Alpha Centauri. But if you can zip into the bulk, you have access to all of the entry points around the universe. That's roughly speaking. So my feeling on top of all that is that the technology required to do that, we can see it in the distant future already, but we can't do it because we can't harness the E word, energy. Energy is key. So we need to have more energy to do it, all right? So they've done it, and really, looking at our track record and how we approach some technological singularities like we are, all right, where would we be in 1,000 years, 500 years, 50 more years? We might have a fusion reactor that's operational in 100 years. It's always 10 years away. We've done that how many times? 4 or 5 times. So that said, I think that we can see the technologies, but we can't do it yet. And none of those technologies violate the laws of the universe. Okay? So.
Sorry. While
The question is, the question is, what did ETs tell us of how far advanced in the future they are from us, in, technologically, spiritually, whatever? I guess that's the question. What has ET told us? I think that's what it is, right? I don't think anyone had addressed that question so far. Okay, that's what we did for 5 years with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation. We had 4,300 people that took our surveys and then answered 70 responses, over 10,000 pages in writing. One of those was those questions. What did ET or non-human intelligence tell you? And the overwhelming response that they told us was that this intelligence that they were interacting with both physical and psyche, is both physical and consciousness-based, okay? And again, send me an email and I'll send you chapters 1 and 2 from our book, which is an analysis of our data, okay? And what the data is revealing is that these experiences are not necessarily physical experiences from our physical reality. Just like a ghost, okay? It appears to you physically, you see it physically in front of you, but that these are interdimensional type of experiences. So in terms of how far ahead, you talk to any experiencer here, and they will tell you all these crazy stories of high strangeness. Like, for example, you call down a UFO, and in 15 minutes they'll show up. Okay? How many people have done that? Called down a UFO, 1, 2, 3, 4. Normally, 15 minutes they show up. So is this something that's physical? Okay? Or something a little bit more complicated? Okay? So I'm not going to get into addressing in detail that response, but just to let you know that these are not necessarily physical-based experiences. These are consciousness-based experiences. And if you want to learn more about it, send me an email and I'll send you chapters from what experiencers have said and what the scientists have said.
E.T. has certainly told me nothing personally about this because sadly I have not interacted with an extraterrestrial. However, I think this is tangentially relevant. 2 things. Firstly, picking up on the future technologies and what might be coming. Go read those 38 research documents that the DIA put on their website last week and will put up again next week. And if you can't wait till then, I think they're on John Greenwald's Black Vault website, but many of them deal with advanced theoretical physics that would be necessary for viable interstellar travel, anti-gravity, invisibility, warp drive, wormholes, stargates. I would also, if anyone ever tells you all this stuff is crazy, firstly, those, of course, were produced for the DIA. Secondly, the British Ministry of Defense has a program called Global Strategic Trends. And as John Alexander alluded to, long-term prediction is extremely difficult because variables come in. So Global Strategic Trends aims to look about 30 years into the future and see what's coming. And go read them. They're on the Ministry of Defense website. And if you know where to look, you'll find it. And you'll see some amazing things like human enhancement, human-machine interface, brain-to-brain communication, human augmentation, and such like. And it's all on the Ministry of Defense website and all free.
To get a little bit more philosophical here, science advances in two ways. A famous book by Thomas Kuhn, The Theory of Scientific Revolutions, that science advances by building on previous research, but there's also what they call a paradigm shift. And a paradigm shift is when a scientific theory or idea all of a sudden flips and goes completely different to what was accepted. And in our lifetime, probably the one you might be familiar with is in geology, that they used to think geology, they would talk about, the rocks, piling up over centuries, et cetera. And then came the idea of tectonic plates, that the earth is made out of plates that shift along the fault lines, et cetera. That was a paradigm shift. That was completely different than what they thought before. And so when you talk about trying to evaluate or predict how science is going to change, if you do the incremental, yes, based on what we researched so far, that maybe in 10 or 20 years we'll have that. But there's always the possibility of a paradigm shift that somebody, an individual like Einstein or whoever is doing research into whatever subject area will say, well, maybe it's completely different. Maybe it's something that we hadn't thought of. Maybe it'll be something that's introduced by ET or by our connections. That's where the spiritual and the mystical comes in. As people's brains change and as we're exposed to different ways of looking things, as we open our minds, that creativity has a role in science, and also serendipity, that something will encounter something that we didn't expect, and that will completely change our ideas of what is possible.
Real quick one. Consider this. In the late 30s, Dr. Goddard gave a demonstration to Army engineers of rocketry technology, and they said they saw no practical purpose for it. The same technology was being introduced in Germany, and they found a use for it. Okay, there's a cultural issue here also of purpose and thinking ahead. In this country, we have a tendency to be very, is there a market for it? Can we sell it? That's the thing. And maybe some of these developments, unless guys like Mark down there can get the grant money to develop it, it may not happen. It depends on a cultural mindset a great deal of the time. And remember the story about Werner von Braun. They asked him, how did you guys make this leap ahead? And he said, other people helped us.
One thing I just want to add, when you're in the near-death arena, and it's interesting because this came up at breakfast this morning with Ray and I were talking about it, and that is the consistent message is that our whole notion of time is wrong. That when you get in these other spaces, time as we know it does not exist. And so therefore, when you have this linear extrapolation here, I think does not make a lot of sense.
This question is for Scott, I think. A lady in the audience asked yesterday, and I'm curious to know the answer too. Did the Bigfoot family eat the stew?
I wanted to know that too.
Yes. Did they like it? We have to assume they liked it because it was gone. The pot was, of course, I wasn't there. I mean, I'm getting this from Ron and the other cowboys that were up there. Yes, they ate it and licked the bowl. The problem was, and I told a couple of people last night that asked me about that, what they did is later on in that same trip, they had some spoiled meat that's like, you know, I have something spoiled in the fridge, I throw it out to the dog or something like that, right? So they had put out some spoiled meat a couple days later, and that was gone and eaten. And after that, there was the activity completely stopped. Completely stopped. And it was as if the big guys decided that they were insulted by the fact that they gave them some spoiled meat. And so all the activity stopped for many months after that. Yeah.
Scott, could you elaborate more on the Bigfoot UFO connection?
I don't know where you came up with that question.
The first 5 years that Ron and I worked together, having experienced events of high strangeness up there, we knew that there was something more going on than we could deal with. And at the same time, we were asked to go to, over the years, dozens of conferences to talk about my study. And me and Ron had a deal because there was a huge segment of the Bigfoot research population that wanted nothing to do with paranormal stuff. It was all about, hey, we got to prove that these animals exist. You know, let's not go into the weird stuff. So me and Ron had decided that we were not going to come out, if you will, with the stuff that was happening to us up there. Well, about 5-6 years ago, we decided it was just too much. We have to just come clean and just start telling the truth and stop trying to keep it under the carpet. So we started talking about it. In fact, Adnan was one of the first guys that interviewed me. Well, he was the first guy that actually interviewed me after we had finally decided, hey, we're just going to tell the truth about it. And that was, what, 6 years ago? And what's the truth? What's that? Oh, well, there's so many things that happen to us up there that brings in the concept of like interdimensionality. Their extra-human abilities, which I could go on and on about. But in Ron's case especially, he had, whenever there was actually a sighting of Sasquatch up there, they seemed to be associated with orbs, with the appearance of orbs. And in one special case, the cowboys up there, one of their hunting trips, they saw an orb come up over the edge of the cliff, because this camp is on the edge of, surrounded by, on 3 sides by cliffs, coming up over the cliffs, go through the camp, through the forest, down through the little creek or spring corridor, and then up the hill and continued. They watched it for several minutes as it climbed over what we call Baldy Mountain. It's just a bald mountain that's right to the east of us, of the camp, which was probably 4 or 5 miles away. But they were able to watch it as it went up and over the top of Baldy Mountain, hovered there for a minute, and then disappeared, not knowing whether it went on the other side or it just disappeared. And that's just one of many, many things that throughout the Bigfoot community, we see more and more correlation between sightings of Sasquatch and sightings of UFOs, and orbs especially.
Yes, what he just said. We interviewed 3 people for our documentary. All of them were Bigfoot experiencers up close. All 3 of them are UFO contact experiencers. One individual was a medical doctor, and I can reveal her name because she just retired. She didn't want to have her name revealed. Dr. Melinda Greer, she's a pediatrician. I met her here 3 years ago at this conference. And she's had 3 Bigfoot experiences, 2 of them very up close, one of them like the whole night with the Bigfoot right on her face with the smell. She saw it, it was huge. And yet she's seen 12 up-close UFOs, okay? And she's a lady that's had everything in the kitchen sink, one of the world's major contact experiencers that I've ever met. And she, again, you send me an email, I'll send you her chapter that she's writing for our book about her, just a little fraction of her experiences, but they're mind-blowing. But again, it's all connected. People that have had Bigfoot experiences, at least the ones that I've spoken to, they've had UFO contact experiences.
Real quick, you know how some people ask me, did you do the numbers against such and such? Okay. Okay, in industry, we sometimes are working on something and we keep it within a narrow scope of what we're trying. Yes, we could do other things with it, but we've got this one objective we're trying to do because that's what the contract is asking for. Okay, and Ray, they had a certain scope of research that they were doing. Okay, here's the deal. And if you got my email, CherylCosta.UFO, Cheryl Costa, all one word, .UFO@gmail. Okay, if you've got something you want to correlate it to in your state, I'm not going to give you the whole database, but if you want to do something in your state and correlate it against something, contact me through that email. Tell me what you propose. Don't be all over the place. Focus in on one thing, and I'll share data with you that's suitable for what you're researching.
I might add, there are people on this panel that know a lot more about Skinwalker Ranch than I do. But from what I understand about Skinwalker Ranch, there was a high correlation between UFOs and actual Sasquatch sightings at Skinwalker Ranch, amongst other strange animals.
Okay, this is kind of a fact or fantasy question, because on the internet there's a lot of information going around that's kind of out there. And I know many of you have reiterated that the ETs are here to like benefit people, to help with their healing and all that, and so I understand that. But there's also this notion out there that it's like Star Wars, that there's commerce that goes on between the galactic groups, and that their biggest trade is something that they call like loosh, or something that's supposed to be like human energy. That is their most valuable trade item. And this is like really big. You hear everything on the internet, but this is a really big thing on the internet. And I was just wondering if y'all had heard anything about this, or if it is totally made up.
Let me respond by saying the vast majority of what's on the internet is bullshit. Okay? If you really want to know topics about people that have seen UFOs and have had contact with non-human intelligence, we spent 5 years doing this. A team of people. Barbara Lamb spoke here. She was on our research committee. Kathleen Martin, one of the major figures in this arena. She was on our research committee. Rosemary Guiley was on Dr. Leo Sprinkle, who recently passed away, researching UFO contact experiencers for, 50 years, okay? Plus, we had all these scientists and academics in our group. So we spent 5 years doing this, okay? Send me an email, and I will send you the detailed data of the ET contact phenomenon. I mean, I use the preferred term UFO contact experiences. They don't match anything at all what for these 4,300 people have stated of what's on the internet, okay? Nothing. Totally contradicts what's circulating on the internet. So I hope, I didn't give you a detailed response, but send me an email and I'll give you the information for you to directly read.
Okay, I've read these things on the internet. E.T. wanted to know where the location of the human soul is. Okay, same context, you know. And I think E.T.'s cracking a joke at the person who was asking it. Okay, I think the E.T.'s making a joke. You don't know where your soul's located, do you? Ha ha, you know, that kind of thing. And from a Buddhist perspective, I'm present but not present. Okay, I'm here, but I'm really not here, and you're not going to find me in this chicken soup, but I'm here. Okay.
Thank you for your presentations. They were all incredible, and we've learned a lot about that. My question is about conscious assisted technology and technology assisted consciousness from the ETs. I had the fortunate experience of having dinner with the late Clifford Stone, and he had told us about his experience with Corona, the ET being that was with him throughout his life. And he had said that Corona had this technology where he could communicate with his recently deceased son using this ET technology. So one is that the ETs have these technology existing consciousness, which is amazing to me. And two is that it seems like there's an entirely connected spectrum of consciousness, of existence, of beings, interdimensional beings, and all that. And I would like y'all to just comment on what your thoughts are about that.
You're one of the very few people that raised your hand when I said, have you ever called down an ET? You and your partner there, good friends. In terms of the consciousness aspect of it, that was what my lecture was all about. Our second book, titled The New Paradigm of Non-Local Consciousness and the Contact Modalities, that book will be focused just on all of that. We have 11 chapters just on UFOs, but the consciousness aspect of UFOs. In terms of your question of technology, we asked about maybe 10 different questions on that topic because numerous people, this was Kathleen Martin told me, Barbara Lamb, Leo Sprinkle, Mary Rodwell, all of these people told me of the thousands of people that they work with, a very, very large percentage were getting physics downloads. They were getting science downloads, okay? So we asked those types of questions. It was approximately 35% of these people were getting physics and science downloads. And then we had 2 questions in the open-ended section where they got to write out the details. These people were getting, like engineering, schematics to build all this new technology. There is a woman, she's not public with it, she used to work with the late Dr. John Mack, okay? She has a master's in science. She has assembled a team of scientists and engineers, and she is hooking them up with the people that are getting these technology and science downloads. One of the individuals was part of our free research committee, who was the president of the John Mack Institute after Dr. Mack passed away. He's a retired engineer, I can say his name, Dennis Briefer, 26 patents to his name. He's an engineer and scientist, so he's part of that group. I could talk about him because he's public about it. And so what you just mentioned, people are doing it right now, trying to hook up the experiencers that are getting these science downloads with the scientists. So it's very real. So the late brother that passed away, that you communicated with, he's not alone. There's literally hundreds of people like him that have gotten these types of information.
It appears that we have solved all the problems in the universe.
I have to go to my notes. That just shocked you, I'm sorry. But earlier, when we were discussing things, there was the question, have y'all had any direct answers from ETs? But also when we were talking, I have a mouse in my pocket, but where was it? It was John and Mark. But talking about the propulsion systems, Mark, when you were talking about what's already out there to help lessen our travel to Alpha Centauri, is that functional? Where you were talking about the short about doing it in a lifetime ability as opposed to what's coming, which you anticipate to be like a 25-mile drive.
Yeah, the concept of that warp drive is something that's actually under research now. EagleWorks Laboratories has actually been working on it, NASA-funded lab. They are doing that. Sonny White was working on that research. He with several other people have figured out ways in which to mitigate the massive disaster that could occur when you show up in a system using this drive, because as soon as you, quote unquote, shut it off, you have an energy that you've accumulated like bugs on a windshield that's going to slough off and blow up the entire solar system and you, possibly, when you arrive. So it was a question of the energy release when it got there. And this is, again, we're sticking with technical science here, all right? So in that answer. But that technology is still far away. Maybe we'll have a Coke bottle-sized probe someday that we can send to Alpha Centauri in a week. But it's going to be several hundred years, before we can acquire the energy to actually do it. But there are some things on the horizon that look promising, especially in working with, say, gravitational particles, which are gravitons as opposed to gravity waves. Well, we didn't know we'd ever see gravity waves until we did, right? So that was a paradigm shift, right? And so gravitons are elusive, but they're out there. So in the string theory world, they don't exist fully here. They actually reach across other dimensions. And that is the interesting connection. So we see the possibilities, but we're not there yet. As far as I know, there's nothing out there working. And maybe there's some secret lab somewhere that says, we got this, it's already working. Okay, but we can't tell. They're not going to share that with us. Okay, we're going to have to dig that out on our own. But as far as I know, it doesn't exist yet. But I do think it's coming because we can see it. And I actually don't think that the human mind can actually think of something that can't actually happen. I think we have that ability. That's a little quirk of mine. So if I think it must make it mean it'll work.
I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, Lynn, so I apologize beforehand. Entanglement. Edgar Mitchell wrote a paper that's going to be in our book, and part of it is about entanglement, okay? And I won't go into those details, whatever, but there's certain people in here right now that can pop out of their body, do astral travel, just think, I want to go to Alpha Centauri, whatever it is, in a blinking of an eye, they're there. Is that right, Lynn? Yes. Okay. The people that are experienced astral travels, Preston Dennett, some of you might know who Preston Dennett is. He's written over 20 books related to ufology and 5 books on the paranormal. I've had, over the last 3 years, conversations with him, and I found out that this man is a major contact experiencer. But one of, I asked him, out of all the things that have happened to you, what is the most important one? He says, astral travel. Let me tell you a quick story. He pops out of his body. He goes to the astral realm. He goes, Mama, Mama. All of a sudden, boom, there's his mother right there. Is that true, Lynn? Right? And all of a sudden, he's interacting with his mother, with her consciousness, having conversations, extended conversations. They're even playing in a river, throwing water on each other. And he says, you don't get wet because it's not real water, okay? So people are able to travel to different locations. Remote viewers do it in our 4D plane, where it's physical reality, okay? So you're physically there in another location, pretty much in a blink of an eye, and you're seeing everything. And John is probably an expert in that area. But in terms of astral traveling, people are doing it at higher planes of dimensions. And I think someone had mentioned it earlier about the hierarchy of different dimensions in consciousness. But anyone talks about Lynn, want to find out more about astral traveling? She wrote a chapter for our new book, and she's had many experiences, but she'll tell you about that experience, astral travel. So you can go, your mind, your consciousness can go to other locations. Thank you.
First, you have to go to the back of the line. Okay.
Okay. All right. Time travel. But John, you had mentioned that with the people that you were speaking with and the different things that were happening, relevant to the actual direct communication question again, you said that so far, the downloads and information going through 2050, what we have is already in place. But I would assume it's being tested because you don't want to jack that up because you don't want people afraid of it. But also that 2060 is already online. Is this stuff coming directly from contactee downloads, like the information to develop the technology? Or is this, I know that the viewers have to be participants as well, just for schematic information, engineering information, so scientists will understand that. I'm not one, that's why I'm rambling right now. But I'm just curious about.
The program that Stephen Schwartz is doing in the 2060, they're looking more at, they ask questions like, what are you doing? What's your society? Healthcare has changed considerably, as has, said the main thing has come out is that the regional areas are much stronger than a central national government at that point. He did say that consistently that something big has happened, but nobody has identified what that is that has caused the precipitation. But they're looking more at macro social changes as opposed to specific technologies that are so. I know a number of people have tried remote viewing technology and even working with tech companies, and that has not been very successful necessarily. But it's certainly an experiment that has been done. I think you got researchers who go into, or remote viewers working with specific tech companies who have questions like, what happens if, where should we be spending money, and those sorts of things. So has worked. Geller, for instance, not so much on technology, but I know several of them that are working on mining, for instance, where to mine and how to get energy, and that has been successful.
Stefan A. Schwartz is also a good friend of mine, but he's known John for many, many more years than me. And he is really a scholar on consciousness. To me, he was one of the inventors of non-coordinate remote viewing, from my perspective. He's written 2 chapters for our for volumes 1 and 2 in our theoretical section. What he told me was that he would give these presentations on remote viewing. He's been doing it for 40 years. And so in these lectures, he would give out surveys to the crowd, to people there. And he would do experiments. Okay, I want you to see and to write out what the future is going to look like, specifically 2040. Okay? I guess this started in the 70s when he would start doing this. One of the things that he was totally clueless about was the internet. Okay? It's like all of a sudden you go to a TV and there is all the information, readily available. Another thing he couldn't fathom, the internet in 1970. The other thing was credit cards. He says all payments are paid with a little card. Money doesn't circulate, And so that's what he was talking about 2040. And he got it by people like you. He would do these remote viewing surveys and workshops, and he would get people to write out, what 2040 is going to look like. And now he said and I just gave you 2 examples, the internet and credit card. And now he's going like 20 or 25 years further than that. And what John said, what they see is like the U.S. geographically is not what the U.S. is all about. It's like they're separate little countries, and also geological or ecological differences, and other topics that I just don't remember. But if you want, type in on the internet Stefan A. Schwartz, and I think he has a report called the Schwartz Report. Is that true, John? The Schwartz Report, and he has hundreds of research papers. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. So I hope I'd answer your question.
Anybody that I've ever talked to who's a remote viewing instructor, you start out trying to teach somebody like a long week or a weekend class type of thing, the worst people to train are engineers. Okay? You start out with 3 or 4, you got 3 or 4 artists over here, musicians, that type of thing. You'll have them at a certain level of remote viewing class but within a day. The engineers, it would take them 2 weeks to get there. Why? You get this kind of artistic, intuitive mind versus this analytical mind, really left brain side. And what happens is they start to do and I've had several students like that were engineers, mathematicians, and they get in there, and the moment it starts to work for them in their remote viewing session, they stop working that right brain and start trying to analyze why it works, and it's gone. It's poison it. It's gone. Okay? So doesn't surprise me when people say we use remote viewing to try and download information at an engineering level. You know, I don't see that happening. But one thing that's troubling me with all the comments, a lot of the comments we've had here, it's all about you're asking for toys. You're asking for some new gadget. I haven't heard a question yet asking for wisdom.
If I might follow up on that, we used to teach PK, the spoon bending parties, if you will, and Jack Houck, of course, was a good friend. He's the guy who developed the process. The absolute worst sessions that I did were ones where they tried to do it in a laboratory, because the engineers were going, hell no, this is not going to happen on my turf. The best sessions are where you have kids. And of course, if you have I also had one, surprisingly, that did not go well, and that was the Parapsychological Association at an annual conference. And it's kind of like, yeah, we like to study this, but I don't want it to really happen here, you know, where they have to acknowledge it. But yeah, dealing with engineers, but if you got a chance in any of these, if you get kids who are open-minded and have not been corrupted yet, that works really well.
Falling directly under the heading of funny you should ask, we have seen a theme of spirituality attached to this entire milieu genre. And I experienced that myself when I started having contact experiences. My whole life changed dramatically, my whole perspective changed dramatically, my whole focus changed dramatically. And we have seen a bit of a theme from several of the speakers on the panel that there seems to be a very strong spiritual element involved. And I spent some time thinking about that. And one of my little pet theories for the moment is the possibility exists that what we experience as the emotion of love or togetherness or oneness is in fact a basic premise or perhaps the language of consciousness. And I was wondering if any of you would have an anecdote or an insight or a personal opinion on the idea that what we experience as love is in fact an integral part of consciousness.
One of the things I would say, I've traveled a lot and worked with indigenous people. Most people in the West, the U.S., particularly with our educational system, come from a fundamental materialistic view. They do not understand that for a large part of the world, that's not the central thing. I talked a little bit about voodoo yesterday. Voodoo is not a religion, it's an entire way of life. And we've dealt with these cultures out there. They come from a spiritual system of everything being interconnected as a premise. And I think in the West, we tend to see that as an outlier as opposed to primary.
My friend Linda, if I had a bell, I'd be ringing it. Ding, 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 ding. Bingo! You won the grand prize. Okay? All of these experiences via the contact modalities are an awakening process. Awakening to what? That this is all about spirituality. It's all about the afterlife. It's about our relationship with the universal mind. Okay? And the core principle of it, John knows, because he knows all those researchers on near-death experiences. Let me tell you what Raymond Moody told me when I went to interview him once. He said, Ray, all of the major researchers on near-death experiences agree that the most important concept when these individuals return back to their earthly plane is not how much money you have, it's not how famous you are, ego is not important, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I went through all of that on Friday. The most important concept is you need to learn how to love each other. Okay? But yet, Raymond Moody told me, a day doesn't go by where I don't feel like strangling somebody. Okay? Now, I know what he meant by that. What he meant by that, it seems so simple to love someone, but yet it's the most difficult concept for humanity to embrace. It's easy to get pissed off. Just ask me with my wife, okay? All right? She knows where to put in the little knife and twist it, okay? So, but yet love is the principal concept. A lot of advanced astral travelers, for example, Tom Campbell, he wrote a whole book about, love, the principle of love, that it's the key ingredient in his entropy theory of consciousness that reduces chaos, okay? And it's love. But we're heading in the wrong direction now. So I think that we're being awakened at this time with the various contact modalities. NDE started in 1975. Out-of-body experiences started in 1972. The whole UFO, ET, visitors from other planets, other dimensions, started when Star Trek got syndicated around the world in 1970. So within 5 years of each other, we had 3 out of the 4 major contact modalities spread all around the world. The topic of ghosts and spirits has been talked about since the dawn of mankind. So was it a coincidence that 3 out of the 4 contact modalities got spread around the world within 5 years of each other? Or argue no. The reason why it's happening now is because we are on the verge of self-destruction. Okay? We talked a little bit about ecological disasters. You live in Florida, right? Well, you better sell that house before you reach 100, okay? we know that all the coastal cities within 100 years are going to be underwater, okay? That's a scientific fact, whether you want to accept it or not. Also, with Ukraine, all you need is for the U.S. or Great Britain to send a warship to Odessa to rescue those millions of people that are going to be bombed to death in the next coming weeks and months. And all you need is a Russian submarine to blow it up. Boom. World War III. And then the next war is going to be fought with sticks and stones. So we are on the verge of self-destruction, folks, here. And that's why all these experiences are happening. At least that's my personal take. And the core principle of love that you mentioned, well, we discovered in our research study, and that's been known in the NDE literature. John will tell you, because he was the president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies, of the transformation that takes place to the NDE experiencers, totally transformed for the positive. And the aspect of loving each other is one of the major components, and spirituality. We borrowed 70 questions from Dr. Kenneth Ring's book, The Omega Project. We applied it to our study of UFO contactees. Well, guess what? We had the same exact data results. These people, 85% of these people became deeply spiritual, okay? They didn't fear death, less egotistical, more loving, blah, 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 blah. So to me, it's like, why doesn't everyone here have a near-death experience, okay? Because if that would take place, it would be a totally different world.
You are not your body. You're not your body. You're part of the one. They're all part of the one. I am the one, and I am looking at another instance of the one, looking back at the one. Okay? That's the thing, and we keep Yes, we want to give love to everybody and be kind to everybody. To quote the Dalai Lama, be kind, be generous, okay? But boy, some of the other ones are annoying as hell, okay? But the bottom line to the whole thing is, have you noticed in media, I'm a writer, you try to sell something to Hollywood, and the first thing those producers come back and say, well, can you make it a little darker? Okay, and this has been getting worse and worse and worse over the last 2.5, 3 decades. Worse, dark, 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 dark. You go on Netflix and most everything is dark as hell.
But it sells.
But it sells. Yes, it makes money. It sells, okay? It's gotten to the point where there's not much I can watch on Netflix that I don't want to puke, okay? That's what's bothering us, and that's what's taking us down a very bad road, and it's going to be a bad thing for humanity, okay? We need to get a positive, this has to be in the mind stream. This is Buddhist thinking now. You have to get this darkness out of the mind stream. There was a book, and Linda read the book recently, Watiko? Okay, Linda, explain that, because this is critical to this conversation.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember it. You know how many books I've read?
Tainted with the darkness.
Mind virus. Yes, the darkness. Yes, the shadow side of life, etc. Honestly, I can't remember exactly. I'm sorry. You know how many books, you know how many things I've read? I'm a librarian, you know? I've read thousands of books in my lifetime, so maybe Mark knows something.
Actually, I don't know anything about that, but Ray will be happy to know that I was dead. Okay, 6 years ago, 6 years ago, some of you know this, I was blind and a quadriplegic. It doesn't look it, and that's because I had a surgery that went sideways, and clot went to my brain, exploded into millions of pieces, and I had 8 major strokes on the table. No one knew it. So I was in a coma for a week, but wide awake. And during that time, well, before that, they were trying to restart my heart, and it wouldn't restart. So for 20 minutes, I was not here. I was taken to another place. And it was a journey that actually took, in that 20 minutes, 3.5 hours of my actual time as I experienced it. I'm a science guy, so this doesn't happen to me, right? What do you do? So, in short, it does change you. I learned how to rewire my brain. I don't have a visual center in my brain anymore. CAT scans confirmed it's dark, it's black. But I rewired the neurons when I had this idea during the coma how to get everything working again. It works. Okay. No, really. Not, but the point being that this is a capability that I think everybody has. And it was a spiritual experience, a spiritual journey that I went on. Now, my mother was Native American and Irish, okay? My father was Italian. 3 of the worst drinking habits you could ever have, but I don't drink. So the point being that that journey changed everything. And it awoke me to a new idea. First of all, when I get in an elevator now with someone who comes in a wheelchair, you don't stare at the numbers and not look. I engage in a conversation. And they're like, whoa, you're talking to me? They're so used to being less than, right? But they're not. They're real people. I was there. I was a guy with a walker. I had a wheelchair. I knew what it was like. And it took a few weeks for me to come back. But the bottom line is that the spiritual side of that, I knew I was going to be all right. And in the coma, even though I couldn't see, even though I couldn't move, I was told I was going to be fine. And that was the guiding light. And I was. Less than 2 weeks in that rehab hospital, I walked out with my sight. And the doctor's like, how's this happening? They said I'd never get the sight back. It's a rewiring of the brain. You can all do that. The brain can rewire. Okay, and it comes from having that kind of experience, having the knowledge that you can recover. I was fortunate to get that knowledge. And I said, that's going to work. And it absolutely did. Okay, so, there is an aspect to that, and I guess you'd call it an NDE, right? I went to New Mexico, but I was at Mount Sinai Hospital. And when they were done with me, they started walking away. I said, what are you doing? I got to get back to the hospital. And they said, you're pretty dense, aren't you? That it literally said that. She was speaking Navajo, which I'm actually learning now. Okay, it's really interesting language. And she said something to the kid that was the guide. And he looked at me and said, yeah, she's right. You're pretty dense. You don't get it. He goes, you're not in New Mexico. You never left the hospital. And then I was, boom, in the coma, wide awake and listening to doctors tell my family I might not make it. And I'm like, well, I know I'm going to make it. And I did. So it was a spiritual journey that led to an awakening. See? So you see, I'm not all science. Okay?
Just to add to this part of the conversation, I follow the woman because she's got such visibility and such power, Oprah Winfrey. And about 3 years ago, she went to a mental health conference. And she came away with the knowledge that instead of asking what's wrong with you, we need to change the question to what happened to you. And that will open up the understanding.
I actually saw something last night, and I've had these past experiences, and I heard you guys talking about angels and demons and UFOs, and I just wonder, I actually have a few questions about it. What are the relations between all three of those, if there are any? What are the, yeah.
As I said, the first book, which was co-edited by myself and 3 retired professors, and a huge team involved with it, dealt with people have seen UFOs and people have had contact with non-human intelligence. Not all of it is love and light, okay? Many individuals have had experiences with negative entities. Rosemary and Ellen Guiley, which is part of our group, she wrote a lot of books about the negative aspects of it. We now have, as she passed away a few years ago, we now have in CCRI Paul Eno, who was a priest, right? A Catholic priest. And he has been spending 50 years researching ghosts, spirits, what he calls attachments, and things of that sort. We have 3 articles in our book of experiencers that have seen UFOs. They've had mainly benevolent types of experiences. 2 of them have had near-death experiences, but they also had what they call an attachment. It's just like a negative energy and a negative being that like enters your consciousness. All of a sudden, you're dating a gorgeous woman, right? And you're like madly in love with her, and you hear a voice, she's no good for you. She's no good for you. Get rid of her. Get rid of her. And then you know, it's pestering you all the time. And then it's like, no, you don't like that food, Go for the greasy stuff. It's like making their life miserable all the time. And then one guy didn't even want to write that chapter because I asked him to write it, but because he was so scared of his experiences. It was like, he termed it almost demonic, but it was highly negative experiences. So yes, there are tons of people. I'm sure at least 1 or 2 of the people here have had something similar to this. So it's not all love and light. What it is that what the hypothesis is that a lot of these souls, spirits, when they die, they don't cross over. Like, go to the light and cross through the light, like in near-death experiences. A lot of these entities remain back in like a 4D plane as negative entities, that they can come down to a 3D reality and interact with us, just like a ghost or a spirit. Lynn, you've heard of people that get these people that are stuck in this limbo and bring them back to heaven, right? Have you ever done that?
I know other astral projectors who have.
Okay, you see, so I'm not, there's many people that do advanced astral traveling that get these spirits that have remained back and bring them back. Now, some of these people might be Hitler types, might be cruel, evil people, and they're going to do everything to, torment you, to harass you. And so, yes, that the whole aspect of good spirits, the archangels, or a whole array of entities, people that have done advanced meditation will tell you that. There's a whole array of entities out there, advanced astral travelers. Eben Alexander mentions that our universe is filled with literally an infinite number of conscious sentient beings. And he was a professor of brain surgery at the Harvard Medical School. Dean Radin, who John knows very, very well, who's part of our group, Dean Radin said, again, our universe is filled with an infinite number of conscious sentient intelligences. So in terms of answers to all of this, we don't have answers. The only thing that we could do at this point is just document the high strangeness, the phenomenon. But you're not going crazy, girl, all right? These are all very common experiences. I'm sure half the people here have had these experiences. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, and that is, I don't know how many conversations, and probably many of you have had them here. It starts with, I've never told anybody but, and then go on into these phenomenal things. And what I'd say is, I think it's terribly important that you go out and tell the but to friends, relatives, and others. There's kind of a joke that goes around in the near-death community. The guy is up talking, he said, I had a near-death experience, and supposedly the doctor stands up and says, well, I was your doctor, and that couldn't happen. You never told me that. And the response was, you're the last person I would have told, because of the receptivity. And these are now widely known both in all of the areas that we've talked about. But I think it's important that these, we make this ubiquitous where, this is part of the common conversation. I think you'll find that it's much more acceptable now than it has been certainly in the past. So tell somebody.
Let me add one brief thing on that. There's a connection between the situation on UFOs and demonic belief, in that certainly there are people within both the US and the UK government who convinced themselves, and rightly or wrongly, but convinced themselves that some aspects of the UFO phenomenon were demonic. And there was a maverick British priest called Paul Inglesby who exerted quite an influence on some fairly senior people in British government, like former Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Lord Hill Norton. And their source for this belief was a passage in, I think, Ephesians, book 2, chapter 2, or something like that. And it's the bit where it describes Satan as being the prince of the power of the air. And what's interesting about that is of course, what this then led to was a lot of pushback against studying UFOs, because the demonic faction was like, no, don't study it because you feed it and give it energy. And so, ironically, a lot of the pushback to serious scientific UFO research within government came not from hardcore scientific skeptics, but from a fairly sort of hardcore religious belief. And indeed, in the US, I know Lou Elizondo has talked about a similar thing, and on one occasion he said that he approached a fairly senior Pentagon official about this and said we should be doing more, and his response was, go read your Bible.
That was true in the remote viewing programs as well. They ran into the same arguments, and we had some people at very high levels who were basically fundamentalists that said, you can do this, but it is demonic, and it has had a strong negative influence in many of these areas, much more, though, than you might imagine.
I want to know what you saw last night.
Well, those people, the guy standing up over there, we were at their VRBO last night, and as we were pulling out, I saw this very dark figure. You know how it's dark outside, and it's very dark, but this was contrasting dark to it. And it was his height, kind of, so I thought it was him, and, you know, because he's a jokester, I thought he was just playing jokes. But then I realized he was still inside. I just gave him a hug to leave, and it was running, but in a way where it was trying not to be caught. You know, like how they kind of waddle, and they're trying to be fast, but be quiet, and it was ducking its head as well. And I thought it was like some kind of man. But then I saw it for a good 5 to 10 seconds, and it went all the way to the corner of their house, and then it turned, like it changed its mind to go somewhere else. I look away for a brief second, and then I look back, and it's gone. Just completely gone, and it just...
Was it big and hairy?
It was just the size of a regular man, so we were thinking it would be like a burglar or something. I don't know, or some kind of drunkard. But I have a couple more questions. I'm sorry. But how do you tell the difference between negative entities and those beings who are just trying to be there for you without trying to scare you? Because all of my experiences, they've just been absolutely terrifying for me.
Okay, let me address that. Let me address the first question, then I'll get to your second question. The first question, we asked that question is, have you ever seen a shadow being? And then we gave a definition to it. The definition is exactly what you described. It was like 1/3 of the people had a shadow being. I was on a Skype call with two researchers for the Free Foundation on Skype, and all of a sudden I saw in the camera behind me exactly what you just described. Go right through it, went right through the glass window, and the two ladies all of a sudden began to scream, you know, that were on the Skype call. Ah, what the hell is that, Ray? I said, oh, it's just a shadow person. Don't worry about it, you know. But it's very common, okay? I remember speaking with friends of ours, John, Chris Bledsoe and his wife. They described seeing lots of what you just described, shadow beings in their home. Now, in terms of our research study, showed that the negative beings was a tiny, tiny fraction out of the 4,300 people of their experiences. But some of these individuals did have these experiences with these negative beings. And you will know immediately, you know, that mostly through these attachments that begin influencing your life, you know, you feel like you have another person inside of you. And again, we don't know whether these are mental health issues or not, you know, but it's a tiny fraction. Don't be scared of them. Initially, most of the people that took our survey, 37% viewed their experiences as highly negative, very scary experiences. But then, you're still very young. But then over many years and many experiences, all these people are love and light. You know, deeply spiritual, like our friend Linda back there had mentioned. So you're still very young. You might initially be scared of it, but once you lose the fear of it, then you're going to expand and explode in an awakening of positivity and transformation.
First, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your research efforts over the years. It's all of you have contributed to the field. I especially want to thank Dave for his archiving efforts, which I think are invaluable. You know, those that do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it, you know. And my question relates to that. There have been a lot of converts to the field since 2017. There's a lot of younger activists out there, and there's sort of been a push towards rebranding of ufology towards UAPology or UAP studies. There's even been calls for the destruction of ufology because of the baggage in the history, you know, that has gone on over 75 years. How do we progress the field? How do we get these younger activists to know the subject better without trashing the entire history? How can we best promote credibility within the field, legitimacy for the subject, better education, especially for younger activists moving forward?
I'd actually like to address that because that's sort of a pet peeve that I'm trying to work on, is that I look at ufology as if we want to be looked at as a scholastic field, one of the things that needs to be done is that the publishing and the state of the literature needs to be brought up to better bibliographic and academic standards. If you put out a book and you have pictures in it, you need to have a caption on the pictures. If you've got 7 people in that picture, you have to name all of them in order. You can't just say Joe and Bob and it's like, well, what are these, who's these other people? Well, everybody knows. No, everybody doesn't know. If you want to, as I said earlier, scientific research is building on previous scholarship. If your book is in the library and somebody looks at it in 100 years, is it going to make any sense to them? Will they be able to reference it and say, this person, did a scholastic level research and has got references, has got a bibliography, has got footnotes, and treats the subject seriously? We've had a few encounters. We are a UFO publisher, and we've had a few encounters with authors. It's like, well, you need to reference it. You need good captions. I've seen UFO books that don't have a date in them. You want to drive a librarian crazy? Don't put a date in your book. Seriously, put out 3 books and didn't put a date in them. It's useless to the scholastic field. If you can't even, take the time to say, when did I write this? When did I publish it? Where was I located when I published it? Even if you're self-publishing, you have to give your complete name. If somebody else contributes to it, you've got to put their name on it. I mean, it's like anybody who's been even through high school has been taught, sign your name to the paper and put the date on it, And these simple, I know you laugh, but it's just, there is a thing called gray literature. And generally, when you evaluate the scientific or scholarly value of a piece of information like a book, usually, and the internet, this is the problem with the internet, is that you evaluate who put out the information. Okay, if it's a scientific institution like the National Academy of Sciences or scientific science magazines, somebody does peer review. Where's the peer review? I wrote this and I put it out. Did you have anybody else look at it? Have you consulted with anybody else? Who did you consult with? What did they say? Did you send it out to review to get some advice on it? Can you take some criticism as to quality of your work? Those are things that give respectability to a scholarly field. I've tried to research, UFO books and the literature out there. There's very few things published any place what we would call reputable. Government information, I mentioned I had a whole class on government information. Government information is considered reputable from a scholarly standpoint. But I had experience at EPA that when the internet first came in, the World Wide Web, I'll try to explain all this to bureaucrats that were used to dealing in paper. And they would put out a book electronically, and then they came to us and said, well, we want to change the information on the website. And as a librarian, I said, well, okay, you can do that, but you've got to say when you changed it and what you changed. You can't just go in and change an electronic manuscript without acknowledging that it's been revised. Oh, we don't want to do that. We don't want the public to know that we changed it. It's too easy to change electronic information. That's one of the reasons we didn't publish electronically, is because anybody can get a hold of it with the hackers. We get hit by hackers sometimes 1,000 times a day, people trying to get into our information. I'm not allowed to use my phone for anything because there's just too many people going after us.
Add something? Can I don't disagree with any of that, but having said that, I do want to just say that there is a potential, issue with that. I think we could all look at this field and say that there are some problems and there are some issues. But if you talk about reforming ufology or policing ufology, I guess the problem is, who does that? Who has the right to do that? Certainly none of us up here. And I think the danger is that it leads to a sort of elitism, that certain people, maybe who have a platform, get more of a say in it. I take a libertarian approach. Yeah, there are problems, but I don't think it's for anyone to tell people how this subject should do. We can all do our personal best to bring out information that, and there's nothing wrong with doing these things simultaneously. The first Director General of the BBC said, good TV must inform, educate, and entertain. So let's do that at the same time. But I think policing and reforming is a slippery slope, and it pushes against the democratization of this subject, because all of our opinions and all of our approaches are, I think, valuable, and it's not for any of us in positions of having a platform to tell any of you how to do it better.
Michael, I think that's a great last question, before we wrap up this event, as far as new people coming into the field. I've talked to a number of people here that's attending their first UFO conference, which I think is great. I think a lot of that has been predicated on the Pentagon UAP report coming out. It really has established that official seal of approval, as we've discussed, myself and others on the panel. My work with the University of New Mexico, I view that as my foot in the door with academia to start looking at the subject seriously. Not just the University of New Mexico, the University of Arizona in Tucson has the Dr. James McDonald Archive. For anybody that goes there, I highly encourage you to review that. It's a treasure trove of fascinating research by the late Dr. James McDonald. We also have Rice University that has an exhaustive collection of paranormal UFO material. Ohio State University also has a collection. So we're seeing a shift, whereas 30, 40 years ago, we wouldn't have seen this. And it's a beginning stage as far as academia looking at the subject. I've had the opportunity to lecture at University of New Mexico on the UFO subject. Even tried to see about teaching a course on the subject, but I was told, well, you have to have a master's degree. Do you have a master's degree? And I was like, no, I have a bachelor's degree, but I've been doing ufology for 30 years. Does that qualify as some type of honorary degree? And I laugh at that, because you can have someone that has a master's in English literature and they pick up one UFO book and read it, and now they're qualified based on academic standards to teach ufology. I think that that's just ridiculous. But we are seeing a shift, I think, with academia slowly. And again, history is just one element, as the work that Ray and John and others have done, really taking this to the whole new level beyond the classic ufology, as Ray alluded to, the materialistic, moving beyond that. I think the academics that you're working with, that's another shift. So we're approaching this from multiple standpoints. Unfortunately, we have to, I think, tackle academia because they set the standard for society, admittedly, in many respects. But I think also we're seeing this increase in sightings that are taking place. More and more people, just like the young woman that was telling us about her experience last night, the more people that have these experiences, it's creating this cultural shift and awakening. The people with near-death experiences as well, and to be able to talk about it. I've had a number of people visit my home and archive in New Mexico, and just within the last year, and I asked them, well, you said you're relatively new to the subject. What started that? The New York Times article. Never gave the UFO subject a second thought. So I think slowly we're seeing a shift, admittedly not as fast as we would like, but I think that all of us here and the conferences, we can't negate the importance of these conferences and being able to interact with individuals and share the information. And also, it's the teacher-student. We're sharing our information, but equally so, you're sharing your experiences with us. It's reciprocal in nature, and I think as long as we continue that, it'll continue to budge that needle forward.
Just very quickly, he mentioned Rice University. They now have the Archives of the Impossible. Archives of the Impossible. They're searchable and they're online. And this does include all of Jacques Vallée's material. So this has just gone up within the last couple of weeks, actually.
All right, everybody, we are at time. First and foremost, I want to thank our researchers for coming here and spending their time and money and sharing their experience with us. Thank you guys very much. Secondly, I want to thank all of you for coming out and for whatever reason, wherever you're here. I don't care. You're here. And you have absorbed a ton of information in the last 2 days. So a lot of this would not be possible for you. And I have, my closing remarks are this, to piggyback on the question, how can we advance this science? To you guys up here, keep an open mind, set your ego aside, and respect each other. For you, get out there and tell everybody you know all the crazy stuff you heard this weekend. Okay, because here you got a panel of folks here, and we're talking to maybe 400 people or so that come out here. Well, if each of you go out and tell 2 people, and they tell 2 people, and they tell, so now these guys can go, oh yeah, I talked to 100,000 people this weekend. Really, kind of indirectly, right? We can massage the statistics a little bit, but that's the whole point. Go out and share what you learned. Okay, take what made sense to you and what felt good, and go out and share it with everybody you know. See you next year.